Akashvani. Now you will listen to a discussion program on India-Sri Lanka relations in light of recent visit to Sri Lanka by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The guests are Dr. Ahmad Muin Faruqi, Prasar Bharati Special Correspondent from Colombo, Sri Lanka, and Professor Gadde Om Prasad, Professor of International Relations, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. The discussion is moderated by Sri Sai Vempati, Assistant Director, News, Akashvani, Vijayawada.
So, the first question is to Associate Professor Om Prasad. Sir, can you help us understand India-Sri Lanka relations, how they have evolved over the last 70 years?
So the India-Sri Lanka relations have been on for some time on the roller coaster because of the ethnic issues that India and Sri Lanka have faced over a period of time, particularly in Sri Lanka. Historically, the ancient relations have underwent because of the cultural, ethnic and cultural bondages that we have shared. The political relations, particularly the diplomatic ties, were established. If you look into the history, in the post-independent period in 1948, following the Sri Lanka's independence, and the relationship was generally been very cordial with both the countries. They collaborating to on the regional forums and initiatives and other arenas. During the Sri Lankan civil war that happened in 1980s and continued till 2009, India played a very complex role, we can say, including the deployment of the Indian peacekeeping force, IPKF, from 1987 to 1990 under the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord. On the economic and other front, we can say that the sphere of the trade relations, India has been a very key trading partner for Sri Lankan economy, and the bilateral trade encompassing the various sectors. India has substantially provided the significant development assistance to Sri Lanka over a period of time, including the lines of credit and the grants for the infrastructure development projects, the housing and other rehabilitation efforts, especially during the conflict affected areas and also during the natural calamities. And when we look into the defense and the military security cooperation, we can see that the military exercises have been there, joint exercises such as the Mitra Shakti and the Flanex. These kind of exercises have strengthened the interoperability and the defense cooperation between the two countries and the strategic agreements, particularly in the post-war period. In the recent times, we can say that the cooperation also has been extended, particularly for the last 15 years in the spheres of the energy, blue economy, and the other initiatives. And the geopolitical dynamics, of course, we can see for the last 10 years, ever since China has become a dominant power in the Indian Ocean region. Ever since the present government has come into power, we can see the friendly gesture coming from AKD, the Dissanayaka's government towards India.
Dr. Faruqi, the Sri Lankan president's visit to India in last December, Prime Minister of India's Narendra Modi's reciprocal visit to Sri Lanka recently, are largely seen to be very successful, with both the countries positively engaging. So, what are the outcomes and how have these visits helped the bilateral relations between both the countries?
You're absolutely right. In fact, you see, in September of 2024, Sri Lanka had a presidential election. In fact, the election was such a significant one in the political structure of Sri Lanka. There was a demand for, a change from among the people. That was the most important aspect of the election. And the electorate had decided to vote a different party which had not had a significant role in the polity of Sri Lanka in the past, in the form of being in the government or otherwise. But after the electoral victory, President Dissanayaka made India the first port of call, and this speaks volumes about how President Dissanayaka also wanted to continue the usual tradition wherein Sri Lanka's presidents have first traveled to India in their first diplomatic visits. And it was a remarkable one because that is something which shows that he was committed towards maintaining the same India-Sri Lanka relations. And you see, under India's neighborhood first policy over the last 10 years or so, India has achieved several milestones in the relations. If we just talk about from 2005 till now, India's development cooperation assistance to Sri Lanka has crossed $6 billion, and that is a huge amount for a country of this size and scale. That talks about how much India places an importance on its relations with Sri Lanka. And now, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Sri Lanka, which was just a few days ago, between 4th and 6th of April, this was a return visit. And this also is another important thing that we have to realize, that this was the visit of first head of state or head of government to Sri Lanka after President Dissanayaka assumed office in September 24. So this shows that even before any other country's head could travel to Sri Lanka, Prime Minister Modi, he traveled here, and with the kind of resolve and with the kind of engagement that both countries had, it brings up a possibility of opening up of a new chapter. A little bit of a context here is that the current government under National People's Power Alliance of Anura Kumara Dissanayaka, it has in it several components, several parties, but JVP, the Janata Vimukti Peramuna, that is the principal component. And JVP has had, a difficult kind of a past, an up and down kind of a phase. However, we have to remember that JVP is a leftist party, and they have had reservations with regard to India's, presence in Sri Lanka in terms of the development cooperation that it has extended. They have reservations with regard to India's involvement, especially in ensuring safety and security in the region. They have had several issues with regard to, they have termed it as apparently and allegedly the expansionist policies, which is their language. However, in a stark contrast to that, now we are seeing the National People's Power government opening their arms and welcoming Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and this leads to acceptance of the India-Sri Lanka bilateral relations from all quarters. This is a very important development. This is in terms of the overall picture. The second thing is that India has now elevated its Sagar vision to Mahasagar, that is a mutual and holistic advancement across all regions. And this is something which talks a lot with regard to the initiatives and the vision that India has. It talks about holistic approach. So holistic would mean sectors across health, education, other social sectors, defense, culture, and various other things which hitherto you'd see that these kinds of engagements will actually matter much more, and it will help both countries. It's not just about one-way traffic, it's about how India can also benefit because of the engagement, and how Sri Lanka would benefit from the engagement. Now, talking about specific outcomes and positives that have come out of both these visits. See, if we talk about the recent ones primarily, there had been 10 major initiatives, and among them, I would rate a few. That there would be game changers. First and foremost, yes, Professor Om Prasad has already mentioned there was inauguration of a couple of projects which were India backed. One was the temperature controlled warehouse at Dambula, which brings about a possibility of 5,000 metric tons storage. This prevents waste of several agricultural produces which Sri Lanka has in the central province. This is something which is very, very remarkable, because till now there wasn't any warehouse of this kind of capacity or nature which was existing in the upcountry and the central province region. And it helps quite a lot to the farming community. The second one is, of course, the solar rooftop project, which India has contributed through its grant assistance program. And this is another remarkable one, because this covers 5,000 religious institutions, especially if we talk about the total capacity, it comes to about 25 megawatts, which is being provided free of cost to all of these religious institutions across all the major faiths in Sri Lanka. And the other major one is the groundbreaking ceremony which was done for the Sampur solar power project. The Sampur project, of course, it has an evolution of its own. It has about 17 years back. If we look at it, was originally conceived as a coal-fired plant. Then later on, the plan was changed that it would have LNG power being used to power it. And now it is being conceived as a renewable energy project, which is a joint venture between National Thermal Power Corporation and Ceylon Electricity Board. This will provide 120 megawatts of capacity, which will add to the grid. Apart from this, about 7 MOUs were signed, which will allow for a framework to be present for the future engagements that will be there between India and Sri Lanka in various sectors. And one of the most important one in this would be the import or export of power. That is primarily the grid connectivity that could happen between India and Sri Lanka. Other than this, we also had an MOU on amendment of the terms for finalization of debt restructuring, and of course, other significant one which the entire media was talking about primarily was with regard to India's cooperation in defense. So this is something which I term as the more important outcomes. And of course, President Dissanayaka's visit to India, it had a very big importance with regard to the continuing of discussions and initiatives that going on. And therefore, so these two visits in quick succession, they talk about the importance which both leaders give to the bilateral relations in the region. So that is something which puts into perspective the relations and the trajectory it would take it forward with. Sai.
Professor Om Prasad.
Yes.
Professor, generally India's engagement with Sri Lanka is a part of its India neighborhood first policy. And India is also projecting itself as a net security provider in the Indo-Pacific at large. And we also see Chinese engagement with Sri Lanka. In this broad context, how do we see India-Sri Lanka relations progressing, especially from the security point of view?
That's a very important area of concern for India because the region, particularly the Indian Ocean region, is covered with Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea on the eastern side and the western side of India. So in this sense, the region has a very important contributor to two aspects of the regional security. One, trade connectivity. The region is extremely important for the well-being and economic stability of many countries in the Southeast Asia as well as China. Measure by the individual countries to address this trafficking will not be very successful unless a regional cooperative mechanism is adopted and all the countries, littoral countries in the region plays a significant role in taking part in controlling, in addressing this kind of trafficking. So in order to address all these questions, whether India as a major maritime power, not only in South Asia, but also in the Indian Ocean region, as a net security provider, it has to take along with all the littoral countries and their participation. In that regard, only the security conclave that we are talking about and the Prime Minister Modi's agreement with the Sri Lanka, particularly in terms of the security issues, whether we term it as the Colombo conclave. So these are all initiated towards the enhancing the regional security. During the visit, Prime Minister Modi has emphasized on the importance of the collaborative security efforts within this framework, stating that we have to work together on the Colombo security conclave so that the Indian Ocean region is protected. Indian Ocean region thus includes the both sides of the seas. The collaboration can be seen as particularly aimed to address the shared security challenges that the littoral countries are facing. So the quick disaster response is also part of the security conclave and security dialogue between the countries so that the more secure and stable regional environment can be provided with this cooperation. So this initiative is in order to enhance that maritime cooperation between the two countries. The 11th edition of the SLANEX happened in December 2024 last year, and it was hosted in Visakhapatnam in India. And the main aim of the SLANEX last year's SLANEX was to harbor the cooperation, particularly in critical maneuvers, etc., and to improve the mutual understanding as well as the interoperability between the two navies, etc. So these were the exercises which play a very important role in not only in bridging the understanding but also increasing the defense ties between the two countries, which can also increase the mutual trust and cooperation. The mutual trust is extremely important between the neighboring countries, and the lack of any kind of mutual trust can invite serious consequences.
Dr. Faruqi, help us understand how India's economic and humanitarian assistance is seen by the political dispensation in Sri Lanka and also by the public vis-a-vis what is termed to be as debt trap diplomacy by China.
It's a very important area of understanding the India-Sri Lanka relations and the relations of Sri Lanka with the other major power in the region, that is China. Now you see, several projects have been planned and executed between India and Sri Lanka. At the same time, China also has executed its own projects under the Belt and Road Initiative. However, most of these projects under the Belt and Road Initiative have been commercially non-viable for Sri Lanka. And one of the major stark examples of those has been Hambantota Port. Sri Lanka could not repay or even service the debt. So this was something which was very, very important later on, leading to a 99-year-old lease that would put Hambantota directly under the control of CHEC. And this is a very important point here, because there were several projects of similar character which were being considered as white elephant projects. Another one being the Matala International Airport, which was very close to Hambantota itself. Thirdly, the Lotus Tower. Of course, not much of benefit has happened from any of these projects. And traditionally, media has termed these as white elephant projects, which led to China's debt trap diplomacy with several countries. This is one part of the story. However, India's model has been different. India has primarily looked at citizen-centric, people-centric projects. India has already completed 3 phases of the Indian housing project, under which 50,000 houses have been constructed and handed over to the beneficiaries in various parts of Sri Lanka, in across 25 districts of all 25 districts of Sri Lanka. And this also includes about 4,000 houses in the plantation sectors alone. Now, under the 4th phase, India is executing and constructing about 10,000 houses in the plantation areas, which the Prime Minister has said during his visit, that India would try its level best to complete this 4th phase at the earliest and hand it over to the beneficiaries. This is a very major development project that India has been executing. It's a very, very big one, touching upon lives of countless. That is giving them dignity, giving them a place to live, subsistence. In fact, this place also has a backyard in which they can do horticultural development, or have a cow, or dairy farming could also be possible in a small scale, and giving them subsistence in a very different kind of a manner. This is one project. If you look at various other projects, similarly, India has executed very, very significant ones. I would also want to name another significant project, that is Suez Area Medical Emergency Ambulance Service. In fact, the original idea was from Hyderabad itself, which had started the ambulance service. In fact, the much acclaimed 108 service in India was the starting point for this Suez Area service in Sri Lanka. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision, taking it to the entire island, today Suez Area service is one of the fastest in terms of reaching to the patient and taking the patient to the nearest hospital, and it is free of cost. And to date, it has from the time it was started in 2016, it has affected lives of 2.2 million Sri Lankans, and that is 10% of the population. Imagine a project saving lives of 10% of a population by just being there and taking them from the site of accident to the hospital. And that is a very, very significant one, given the golden hour of 1 hour, the first half an hour to 1 hour, in case of several medical emergencies. And there are many. If I can start naming them one after the other, you can talk about the projects in the upcountry areas where training of the teachers is being done, providing educational facilities, scholarships Countless scholarships have been provided under ICCR, and India continues to do so in plantation sector as well. Apart from this, India is continuing with educational collaboration between IIT Madras and University of Kilinochchi, and in the northern part of the island. India, in fact, wants to also have a campus of IIT Madras in Sri Lanka, which the government is still working on it, and probably in near future we'll get to see this getting materialized. Now, this is on one part of it. The second part is the investments which you talked about, and that is something which is a very, very major one which India has been working on. Dr. Jaishankar, during his several visits to Sri Lanka, had mentioned that India has a policy in which India looks at Sri Lanka's development not led through credit based projects, but an investment driven growth. Now, that is something which is very, very remarkable. So far, India's FDIs had reached till about 2023, 2.2 billion US dollars. But over the last 2-3 years, if you see, there is Colombo West Container Terminal. There are other projects which now have been discussed, and an MOU has been signed, including the grid connectivity, the pipeline project, which it's under a tripartite agreement. Then thereafter, there are also LNG-based projects that India would be executing. Total overall, I see a project net worth of about $4 billion approximately, encompassing all these sectors. And this talks volumes about how India wants Sri Lanka to come up, thrive, create jobs, create better employment opportunities for the locals, gain revenues, in fact, also become independent and Atmanirbhar in terms of its energy resources. Because you see, Sri Lanka is in equatorial region, and it has immense potential for renewable energy, solar as well as wind. And of course, tidal has not been harnessed much, but these two, it is being claimed that it is in a place where a lot of offshore, potential also exists in the region. And once Sri Lanka can harness all of this, it will be in a position to export, and this can be a source of forex for Sri Lanka as well.
Dr. Faruqi, what role does the ethnic Tamil issue play in the India-Sri Lanka diplomatic relations, especially concerning Sri Lanka's implementation of the 13th Amendment?
It's a very diverse topic to begin with, Sai. I want to add here that there are, communities in Sri Lanka which have cultural connect with India. If we just talk about the ethnic in terms of the Tamil issue, that's a very narrow way of looking at things. The Sri Lankan legend is that there was a prince called Prince Vijaya from the eastern part of India, who along with his followers had traveled to Sri Lanka and had started the first kingdom in Sri Lanka. And from there, the Sinhala population has emerged from among the natives and the group from the eastern part of India. So this is the origins. If we look at the ethnic itself, so this is one part of it. The second is about 2000 plus years ago, several trade and other relations that India and Sri Lanka had, that led to several of Tamil populations settling down in the northern and eastern part of Sri Lanka. This is the second issue. And the third is about 200 years from now, from 1823 onwards, the British had brought a few Tamil people from India to work in several plantations, the coffee, tea, and rubber and coconut plantations in Sri Lanka. So there are these kind of connections that India and Sri Lanka share in terms of the ethnicities itself. But if we talk about the Tamil issue and the implementation of 13th Amendment, India has categorically and has continuously maintained that India wants to put across the message that it has committed towards full and complete implementation of 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment to the Constitution of Sri Lanka was a provision that was incorporated after the 1987 Indo-Lanka Accords. And thereafter, the Constitution was amended by the Sri Lankan Parliament to incorporate an element wherein certain powers are provided for the northern and the eastern part of the island, the northern and eastern province. There was also provision that there would be provincial elections, devolution of powers, including the police powers, and several other measures to enable the Tamils to take care of their culture. 13th Amendment implementation is something which is very, very important and should happen in Sri Lanka. During this visit, Prime Minister did announce a very big multi-sectoral grant assistance program of about 2.37 billion Sri Lankan rupees. And that's a huge investment in several sectors: agriculture, health, education, and many others. And this is something which is, truly speaking, people-centric and touching upon lives of countless in the eastern part of Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Dr. Faruqi. Professor Om Prasad, help us understand India's engagement with its neighbors, be it Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Bhutan, Nepal, and also Bangladesh. Generally, it is said that India adopts generally a non-reciprocal relationship, and also by following the principle of non-interference in the domestic issues. Considering the present state of affairs in Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, how do we see this going out?
India follows the non-reciprocal relationship, as we see that the requirements and the size of the neighborhood is very, very small and minimal in comparison to India. India's presence itself is a big, sometimes there is something called the small state psychological syndrome. The small states are scared with the presence of a big power and a big country, and not only in terms of size, but also in terms of population, in terms of production, in terms of the economy, in terms of the military size, and in terms of the various other categories. So in order to address this problem that the South Asian neighborhood has, India plays a very significant role in connecting these countries, as well as providing access for the connectivity between these countries. In that sense, India definitely acts like a responsible player. The issues with the neighborhood countries are mostly in order to engage the domestic political landscape and vis-a-vis India. But when we come to reciprocal, of course, India, whether it is through softer preferential trade agreements, bilateral preferential trade agreements that we have signed, we have extended the MFN most favored nation status to almost all the South Asian countries. And we have also opened the market for their products. And the majority of their economic engagements happens with India. For example, 70% of Nepal's imports and exports are associated with India. Nepal also got the access to the sea through Howrah port and through the Visakhapatnam port to the international trade. And the same thing with Sri Lanka also. More than 60 to 70% of Sri Lanka's engagement also happens with India. All these countries, not only culturally, historically, socially, linguistically, but also economically associated with India. So that gives the clear picture where India is a major player, and non-reciprocal is not in a negative sense, but in a more positive sense. Yes. Without expecting anything in return from these countries.
Dr. Faruqi, the recurring issue of the fishermen of both the countries, the fishermen of both the countries moving into the sovereign space of the other country, has been a recurring issue in the India-Sri Lanka relations. In the recent visit of the Prime Minister and also the prior visit of President Dissanayake, has there been any engagement on this of how to address this issue?
So you see, fisher folk issue has been a long-standing one in the India-Sri Lanka relations. Yes, there have been alleged violations of the International Maritime Boundary Line, the IMBL, and alleged, instances wherein the fishermen of one side have gone into the other territorial waters. But India has taken it up with the Sri Lankan leadership. The Prime Minister did talk about it during his discussions, and they have talked about having a framework under which they would take discussions in this topic, in this area forward. There already is a joint mechanism for discussions that exists between both sides. And in fact, earlier in October, there was a meeting in this regard as well. In addition to this time around, there was a discussion that there would be discussions between the associations of fishermen on both sides, that this would be on parallel to the existing frameworks also. And they have talked about, taking more of these kinds of engagements on a regular basis, and any issues out of it need to be addressed in a very humanitarian kind of a manner. India has reiterated that such issues, wherever there are alleged violations or any such cases wherein the Sri Lankan authorities are dealing with Indian fishermen, need to be addressed in a very humanitarian manner. That is one. Secondly, India has also maintained that there should be no use of excessive violence or excessive aggression in terms of maneuvering while dealing with alleged cases of boundary line violations. This is another thing which India has maintained. In fact, in recent times, we had come across cases wherein there were gunshot wounds that fishermen from Indian side have had from the Sri Lankan authorities, and this had become a very big issue there, which the diplomatic channels had engaged between each other, and the concerned fishermen had later on been provided with all the necessary help and support. In addition to this, during the PM's visit itself, about 14 fishermen had been released by the Sri Lankan authorities, showing a gesture of a symbolic gesture of acknowledging this issue. And Prime Minister had mentioned that he has talked about the issue with the president and has urged that those who are under the Sri Lankan custody need to be released at the earliest. And even he had talked about releasing the seized boats, which will definitely be a huge impact, especially for the Indian fishermen. And this is something which is very, very remarkable, because these kinds of engages and these kinds of discussions had, although did not bear fruit earlier, but this time around, there seems that Sri Lanka also is equally responding. The gesture of releasing fishermen on the same day during the Prime Minister's visit talks volumes about how much Sri Lanka also acknowledges this issue, and they are the kind of commitment they have towards addressing this issue.
Also, Dr. Faruqi, right now the world economy and world trade is also being impacted by the tariffs imposed by the US. So in this regard, do we see any engagement between India and Sri Lanka to, sort of smoothen out any business issues between both the countries?
Yes, you see, the trade tariffs which have been imposed, they are impacting the entire world, as we are already aware. With the tariffs that have been imposed on Sri Lanka as well, it has a huge bearing on Sri Lanka's exports, primarily because these are one of the mainstays from which the forex revenues for Sri Lanka are achieved, apart from tourism, foreign remittances, and of course, the export of tea. So apparel is one of the most important things that Sri Lanka does export. And during the discussions that both leaders had, there was a talk about the issues at hand because of the tariffs, and how both countries would engage between them and take trade relations forward. In fact, I want to add a little bit of perspective here. India and Sri Lanka had one of the earliest free trade agreements, which was signed between the two countries and implemented as early as 2000. And from then till now, Sri Lanka's trade has grown over 10 folds. If you see, India is a 1.4 billion population market, and India is open to good quality items. In fact, if we look at several of the products of Sri Lanka, if we talk about apparel, if we talk about cinnamon, if we talk about tea, these are among the world class. And Indian consumers of today, which have grown from about 450 million, the middle class, to about 550 million, just between the two visits of the Prime Minister from 2017 till now. So this consumer market is willing to pay a premium to purchase good quality items. And if Sri Lanka can provide these good quality items and export them to India, that is a very major possibility and potential which Sri Lanka can definitely gain with its trade relations.
Dr. Faruqi, in the recent visit of the Prime Minister, we saw the Prime Minister engaging with the winning team of 96 of the Sri Lankan cricket team, and also visiting some Buddhist sites. So how do we see Buddhism and cricket further giving positive impetus to the Indo-Sri Lanka relations?
See, these are two separate areas. Cricket is a very small component, but Buddhism is a very major component that aligns both these countries together. Cricket, of course, both countries are mad about cricket. Both countries are World Cup winning. both countries have very good players which are loved across both countries. In fact, we saw Prime Minister interact with the 1996 World Cup winning team, which includes Sanath Jayasuriya, Aravinda De Silva, Marwan Atapattu, and various other players. And these players also have a huge fan following in India. On the other hand, when you mention about Buddhism, Buddhism is a very major connect that exists between India and Sri Lanka. And at this point, I want to mention that the Prime Minister did talk about the relics of Mahatma Buddha, Gautama Buddha, which were found in Gujarat. And he mentioned that they would be brought to Sri Lanka during the Vesak festival that would happen in the month of May in Sri Lanka. And they would be displayed in Sri Lanka for the sake of the devotees in the island nation. And this is a very big gesture. Gautama Buddha has, according to the legend of Sri Lanka, that he has visited Sri Lanka on 3 occasions. And this display of the relics of Gautama Buddha here would pave a long kind of a chapter in the Buddhist relations that India and Sri Lanka would share. Not just this, the Prime Minister's visit to Anuradhapura's sacred city and paying respect at Jayashri Mahabodhi temple just before the 2,200-year-old tree, which was brought by Sanghamita Teri to Sri Lanka. That also has a huge bearing in terms of how India and Sri Lanka want to engage in the bilateral relations in Buddhism itself. And Prime Minister did also mention that India would provide assistance for redevelopment of the sacred complex, the sacred city of Anuradhapura, wherein there are several viharas in various, which were made during various times. And this is a very important step because these viharas go a long way in engaging between the two countries in the sphere of Buddhism and can take it forward in the coming times.
Thank you, Dr. Faruqi. Professor Om Prasad, before we conclude, help us understand how the future trajectory between India and Sri Lanka may probably be, and what are certain steps that both the countries should take to ensure that the engagement is positive and gives benefits to both the countries.
Yeah, both the countries are in a good trajectory for the last couple of years. Irrespective of the political backgrounds, the Sri Lankan political arena inviting India and embracing India as a good friend is a good gesture that we can see, and that also indicates the trajectory that we can foresee in future. The number of agreements that India has signed with Sri Lanka, particularly in the sphere of the energy sector cooperation. The energy and the blue economy are going to play a very important role in fostering and strengthening the economic relations between the two countries. The security cooperation is also going to play a very important role in the fostering relations between the two countries. And most importantly, since Trump has imposed around 44% of the taxes on Sri Lanka, India's role in enhancing or in supporting economy of Sri Lanka is going to play a very, very important role.
Thank you, Dr. Faruqi and Professor Om Prasad, for joining us and helping our listeners understand India-Sri Lanka relations and also the outcomes of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent visit to Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Thank you.
Until now, you listened to India-Sri Lanka relations in light of recent visit to Sri Lanka by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Presented by Regional News Unit, Akashvani, Vijayawada.